Hello and welcome to my channel. There's been a lot of discussion lately about the letter to America penned by Osama bin Laden back in November of 2002. Recently I went online looking for it and discovered that it was actually quite hard to find. The Guardian had deleted it and that was the main source. Anyway, so I poked around and found it. Since then it's much more available. But I want to go through it and look at it from a perspective of an American and see what is interesting about it. So here is the letter. I have gone through and formatted it with headings to make it a little bit easier to navigate. One of the interesting things that you'll notice about the way that it's formatted, you have Q1, 1A, and then Roman numerals. He formats it as though it's a legal document or, the way that the Constitution or amendments to the Constitution is formatted. And I don't know how widespread that is, that it's a unique way of doing things. When I look at letters, especially public letters, they're not laid out this way. I don't know Arabic culture very well, and so maybe if this is more common, please let me know, but to me, that's interesting. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Permission to fight, and there's notes here, against disbelievers, is given to those, note believers, who are fought against, because they have been wronged, and surely Allah is able to give them, note believers, victory. And that's a quote from the Quran 22:39. Here we are stating from Islamic scripture why a fight is justified. And the idea here is that God is giving permission to believers to fight against disbelievers when they are fought against. And so that will inform bin Laden. He's going to make the case that his fight against America is justified because America has fought against him and against the people of Islam. Another quote then, those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of Taghut. And the note here, Taghut is anything worshipped other than Allah, and may be associated with Satan. So, fight you against the friends of Satan. Ever feeble is indeed the plot of Satan. Satan, in this case, would be the people he's fighting against. And the final opening paragraph, some American writers have published articles under the title, On What Basis Are We Fighting? I would be really interested to read that article. I did a search and I could not find it because I don't know who we is. Is it from the perspective of the Americans or is it from the perspective of the Islamists? Anyway, these articles have generated a number of responses, some of which adhered to the truth and were based on Islamic law, and others which have not. And I guess the reason that I would like to read the article is because I don't know if Osama bin Laden is claiming that Americans should be fighting based on Islamic law, which would be preposterous of him, but not inconsistent with what an extremist might expect of his enemies, or if he's saying that the articles misrepresent what he and his people are fighting on because his fight is based on Islamic law. Hopefully he's saying the latter. Here we wanted to outline the truth as an explanation and warning, hoping for Allah's reward, seeking success and support from Him. While seeking Allah's help, we form our reply based on two questions directed at the Americans. So I think that the reply is directed at Americans, not the questions. The questions, which he looks at, are directed at him. And so he lists them both here, but doesn't address the second one until later, so I'm not going to look at it until we get further in the document. Why are we fighting and opposing you? That's the first question. The answer is very simple, he says, because you attacked us and continue to attack us. As we read in the opening paragraph, the Quran gives permission to believers to attack unbelievers when unbelievers are attacking them first. So his answer here is completely in line, and I think that's what he's talking about, the truth that is based on Islamic law, right? Why are we fighting you? Because you attacked us and continue to attack us. Therefore, by the Quran's law, we, the believers, have the right to attack back. Okay. Bin Laden makes three major points in answering this question, and the first is because you attack us, and then he gives specifics. The first, you attacked us in Palestine, and he talks about all of the issues that have gone on there. I'm not real interested in talking about the specifics of the history. I'm just trying to understand bin Laden's claims. but he goes into a lot of detail about Palestine, the occupation, the issues there. One of the interesting points he makes here in 2, anyone that doesn't repeat the fabricated lies of the Jews is accused of anti-Semitism. So here he's talking about maybe a very early instance of cancel culture, but you know, you hear that whenever you say something that is true, and the left says something like, oh, you're a bigot, and the right says, oh, you're not a patriot. We know this kind of thing happens, and bin Laden is pointing that out. It certainly is a failing of American culture that we are so willing to denigrate people who disagree with us. And that is something that we needed to fix back then in 2002, and it's something that we need to fix today. Okay, but that's not his major point. His point is the attacks on Palestine, the attacks in Somalia, the attacks in Chechnya, the attacks in Kashmir, and Lebanon. Then he says, under your supervision, that's American supervision, the governments of other countries which act as your agents attack us on a daily basis, and he goes through some of those issues as well. In addition, you steal our wealth and oil, your forces occupy our countries, you have starved the Muslims of Iraq, you have supported the Jews in the idea that Jerusalem is their capital. Okay, so that's the end of the first response to the question, why are we fighting and opposing you? So, given all that, I think it makes sense to me today, given all of the outpouring of support for Hamas and for the people living in Gaza that we have seen since the attacks on October 7th, that people would respond positively to all of the things that bin Laden is saying about Palestine, about who should own Palestine, and about these words like occupation. Without going into a discussion about how accurate his claims are, it does make sense that this letter, which talks about Israel as a crime that needs to be erased, the claim that the Muslims are the most worthy nation to be in Palestine, it makes sense that this letter is going viral right now. People in college right now would have been born roughly the time that the 9/11 attacks took place. So this attack was not shocking to any of these students who were supporting Palestine. These attacks have informed the world that they have lived in, and especially young people who have had very little exposure to the Israeli conflict over their lifetime. It makes sense that they would make this letter go viral because it is saying, in eloquent terms, a lot of the things that they want to say about Palestine and Israel. If I accept everything that bin Laden is claiming about Palestine, I still have a major point of contention under A Roman numeral 2, where he says the Muslims conquered Palestine and drove out the Romans, and that area returned to Islam. And that's incorrect. Islam did not exist prior to the Romans, and prior to the Caliphate taking over the Middle East from the Romans. But if right of conquer gives you access to land, which is what he seems to be claiming here, then at the end of World War I, when Britain took the Middle East from the Ottomans, it seems by his own standard, they would get to decide who gets to live here. So this argument is particularly weak. The other major point of contention I would raise is under F, where he claims that 1.5 million Iraqi children have died as a result of your sanctions. From the level of statehood, one cannot claim that any people or country is obligated to trade with another people or country. And so treating sanctions as though they are an act of aggression or oppression, as though they are an attack, is quite dishonest in my opinion. And a third point of contention is in G. Bin Laden claims, as a justification for an attack against the USA, the fact that we might destroy a mosque. He says, with your help and under your protection, the Israelis are planning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is in Jerusalem. It stands today. So this is not a justification for war. It is not an attack. It is an assumption on his part and not a good one. Okay, why are we fighting and opposing you? Answer number 2. These tragedies and calamities are only a few examples of your oppression and aggression against us. It is commanded by our religion and intellect that the oppressed have a right to return the aggression. Do not await anything from us but jihad, resistance, and revenge. I find this paragraph kind of funny that in one he lays out a case. Here are all the ways that we've been attacked, and here he's just saying, yeah, you attacked us. So, okay, where one was a really good response, 2 is not. 2 is simply emotion. I think it's really easy for a modern American to sympathize with people experiencing difficulty, and so laying those difficulties out would certainly speak to the modern American. Actually, let me scroll back up to 1D, where he says, "You steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of you," I think it's supposed to be your, "international influence and military threats. This theft is indeed the biggest theft ever witnessed by mankind in the history of the world." I don't think there's a lot of validity. I am certainly no oil industry expert, but my understanding is that OPEC, which is the Middle East hegemony that controls the oil, sets prices, and even the oil that is drilled here in America and sold here in America adheres to OPEC's prices. So they have a lot of their own autonomy, and they have for a very long time. I'm sure there's some things that I'm not aware of that he's referring to, but I believe that oil from Arab lands pretty well benefits Arabs. Okay, in 3, bin Laden points out that the attacks that he's already listed may be disputed to justify aggression against civilians, which the 9/11 attack certainly was. So in 3, bin Laden lays out why attacking the civilians and the economy was justified. So in A, I think the first sentence really makes no sense, but his point here is that American people are the ones who choose their government by way of their own free will. He says, "Thus the American people have chosen, consented to, and affirmed their support for the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, for the occupation and usurpation of their land, and its continuous killing, torture, punishment, and expulsion of the Palestinians. The American people," he claims, "have the ability and choice to refuse the policies of their government and even to change it if they want. As far as my research shows, no president since the 1940s has made Israel and supporting Israel a major point of their campaign. 2004 is the only election in my lifetime that I can think of where foreign policy even played a major part. Generally speaking, Americans are concerned with what their government is going to do to Americans. But more than that, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the American government works. For better or worse, it's not like the president is the one making the decisions here. It's not like Congress is the one making the decisions here. The people who are democratically elected do not appear to have a great deal of say in how Israel is supported or anything like that. The military is not democratically elected. Neither are the agencies that deal with foreign policy. There are people in America today saying things like, well, the people in Gaza voted for Hamas, therefore they should be as guilty as Hamas is. And like bin Laden in this letter, I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the divide between the people and their government, even democracies. B, the American people are the ones who pay the taxes which fund the planes that bomb us, the tanks that strike us, the armies which occupy us, and the fleets which ensure the blockade of Iraq. These tax dollars are given to Israel. So much in line with my point above, the whole idea of tax is that it is the action of a kleptocracy. If the people of America got to choose whether to pay taxes, and if they got to choose where the tax dollars go, imagine a GoFundMe.gov, they would not be able to spend as much in Israel or in foreign wars as they currently do. They're only able to do that because they coerce tax money and then they do with it as they will. That is not a justification for attacking the American people. C, the American army is part of the American people. It's the same people who are shamelessly helping the Jews fight against us. Okay, again, yes, but people who are serving in the military, we use that term serving in the military not because they're offering service or something, they're paid to do it, but because they can't question orders. They do what their superiors tell them to do. They serve their commanding officers. There are repositories of power, and the people are fundamentally different from the government. The American army is not, and I think he means military generally, but the American military is not part of the American people. It is staffed by American people, but it is part of the American government. The picture that bin Laden is painting is as though the Americans go to the ballot box and see support Israel and they check it, and then they see invade Iraq and they check it, and that's just not how it works. D. The American people employ the American forces which attack us. This is not an accurate representation of how that structure works. This is why the American people cannot be innocent of all the crimes committed by Americans and Jews against us. In F, he makes a religious case. Allah the Almighty legislated the permission and the option to take revenge. Thus, if we are attacked, we have the right to attack back. And I think we do this a lot, even, right and left Americans talking to each other. We justify ourselves in ways that make no sense to the other side. So bin Laden here is claiming that because he is a Muslim, he can take revenge because Allah has given him permission. Okay, that's great, but wouldn't it be a far more powerful argument to say that he stands on principles of self-governance and self-determination or something like that? I'm not saying any of that would justify what he's done. He is not wrong to point out that America, the American military, and the American government has been far too involved in foreign countries. What bin Laden fails to understand, and you see the same argument when people talk about Israel and Gaza. We're saying, hey, every Arab in Gaza who gets killed is probably creating another extremist, another member of Hamas. And in the same way, Osama bin Laden has to be aware that whatever presence we had under Clinton in the 90s was absolutely nothing compared to the war on terror that we launched in response to his attack. And so, as passionate and heartfelt and even articulate as this letter may be, it misses the point that his attempt to take revenge resulted in everything getting so much worse. And all of the suffering in the Middle East due to that rests squarely on the shoulders of Osama bin Laden. To finish out the paragraph, whoever has destroyed our villages and towns, we have the right to destroy their villages and towns. Whoever has stolen our wealth, we have the right to destroy their economy. And whoever has killed our civilians, we have the right to kill theirs. First of all, he's using the word right incorrectly, and that can't be underemphasized. Second of all, this idea of hitting back only matters strategically if you're able to hit back so hard that the other person doesn't rise. And as we've seen with the war on terror, we rose, and it was brutal for the people in the Middle East. So the American government and press still refuse to answer the question, why did they attack us in New York and Washington? And bin Laden makes the point here, if Sharon, that's Ariel Sharon, who was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, is a man of peace in the eyes of Bush, we are also men of peace. Interesting point. Less interesting is the next line, America does not understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it using the language it understands. Clearly, coming back to the war on terror and our response to the 9/11 attacks, we did not understand the language that bin Laden used to communicate, stop attacking us. We just saw a threat to us. And so in that way, bin Laden utterly failed, and his justification is very, very hollow, given that he poked in the eye an enemy that could crush him. America certainly understands manners and principles, and I think that that's maybe more, I don't want to say more true today, but we're certainly more sensitive today, and that's why this letter has gone viral, because today we're seeing this case laid out using excellent language. I mean, I know he didn't speak English as a translation, but students see this letter today, which so eloquently lays out his case, even if there are blatant errors and issues with his logic, but is laying out the case. And so, no, we understand manners and principles. You didn't make this case back then. Maybe he had no capacity to make the case, but certainly America responds to manners and principles, and it is silly of him to even write this letter if he thought that wasn't true. Okay, all that established, let's move on to question number 2. What I love about question number 2 is that it is not a question that an American would ever ask. It is a question inserted solely for the purpose of bin Laden being able to pontificate. So the question is, what are we calling you to, and what do we want from you? And number 1, the first thing that we are calling you to is Islam. Nice. The religion of the unification of God, of freedom from associating partners with him, and rejection of this. I'm not really sure that sentence made a ton of sense, but we understand what he means. He believes that this is the one religion on earth that is actually from God. He says here, Islam is the religion of all the prophets and makes no distinction between them, peace be upon them all. So it is unifying. Sure, unless it's not. It is to this religion that we call you, the seal of all previous religions. He lists some attributes: the best of manners, righteousness, mercy, honor, purity, and piety. It is the religion of showing kindness to others, establishing justice between them, granting them their rights, and defending the oppressed and the persecuted. Toward the bottom of the paragraph, this religion is unity and agreement between all people without regarding their color, sex, or language. So this all sounds absolutely fabulous. It sounds unifying and wonderful. The problem, of course, is that Mr. bin Laden is a Sunni Muslim. If he meets somebody who is a Shia Muslim and somebody who is a Christian, Jew, or atheist, or pagan, he's going to put them in the same box. And if he is an extremist, a violent Muslim extremist, then he will have the same attitude toward killing each of them without regarding their color, sex, or language. And I know I'm being a little bit extreme there, but my point is to say, yeah, but what if I'm a Shia Muslim? Well, now suddenly you're not unified with me, right? What if I'm a Kurd? Well, the Arabs are not unified with them, and neither are the Turks. And so there's just a lot here that he's saying, and it sounds really nice, but it doesn't appear to be true given the actions of people who profess this religion. Yeah, you can make that same claim about most religions, fine, but there are specific issues that we see here. Christianity, for example, is not real big on revenge, it's more turn the other cheek. And so Islam does not always appear to be the religion of peace that it claims to be. As passionate and as dedicated as Mr. bin Laden is toward his own religion, his arguments as to why all of America should join this religion are extremely weak. And his second point under 2b for question 2 is that they're calling us to the Quran, which is a miracle. Alright, number 2. The second thing we call you to is to stop your oppression, lies, immorality, and debauchery that is spread among you. He goes further. We call you to be a people of manners, principles, honor, and purity, to reject fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gamblings, and trading with interests. That is an interesting litany. We call you to all of this that you may be freed from the deceptive lies, he says, and the lie specifically that you are a great nation, and this lie, he claims, conceals the fact that we are in a despicable state, and he's calling us to be better than that. Well, first of all, yes, let's all be better than we are. Let's seek improvement. Let's try to ascend to something higher. Absolutely. However, this message is a little hollow coming from the guy that just murdered 3,000 civilians in New York. So, nice try, Mr. bin Laden. But again, this is a fundamentally weak argument at this point simply because of who it's coming from. If someone who is admirable were saying these things, fine. It's a good message. Yes, we should all be better, or seek to be better. But also, one of the things that people do when they are in conflict is to, and maybe this is too strong a word, but to dehumanize one another. It's a lot easier to fight the enemy if I objectify them as simply enemy. We see this kind of behavior in propaganda all the time. The problem here is that he is speaking to his othered audience as though they might be receptive to his internalized propaganda. If he were saying this to another Arab, it might be great. And in fact, I'm sure that it is the kind of thing that he said to other Arabs, and they all said, yeah, this is great. But like people in the United States of America who try to debate topics and can't because they're using in-group language too much, as he sits here and tries to say things like, you want to be freed from the deceptive lie that you are a great nation. Well, objectively, the United States of America in 2002 was a great nation. That's hard to argue with. And so he's calling us to be better, but it sounds a lot like he's calling us to respect him and his people without him respecting us and our people, because clearly he hasn't done any research on how our nation operates or anything like that. So there are some serious weaknesses and flaws in his arguments. Roman numeral 1 is interesting. You are the nation who, rather than ruling by the Sharia of Allah in its constitution and laws, choose to invent your own laws as you will and desire, here. You separate religion from your policies, contradicting the pure nature which affirms the absolute authority to the Lord and your Creator. One of the criticisms toward the United States of America at the onset of the War on Terror was that we were not approaching the Middle East with a high degree of understanding or respect for Middle Eastern cultures, and that was true. As we went in and tried to say things like, hey, democracy is so awesome, try to do this, there was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of violent pushback. We in America value our diversity. We praise ourselves for our diversity. It is a national source of honor, a national source of pride. And so the criticisms that bin Laden is pointing out toward us in that we created a constitution, invented our own laws, and separated religion from policies, the reason that we did this was to maximize the capacity of our nation to have as many different types of peoples as possible. That was the whole idea of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, is that your pursuit may not match someone else's pursuit. I may not thrive in the same religious conditions that you do, and so to have my best life, I need to seek out those conditions. And then the idea of the United States of America is that I should be free to do so. Bin Laden is in effect calling us to abandon these values that have been very positive throughout America's history, in order to adhere to his values, or the values that he believes are of God. Bin Laden in Roman numeral 2 states that because we charge interest on our loans, we have allowed the Jews to take control of the economy, and now they control the media and all aspects of our life. We are simply their servants. And then I love this at the end of Roman numeral 2. Precisely what Benjamin Franklin warned you against. According to my research, bin Laden must be referring to what's called the Franklin Prophecy, which is a statement, it's an anti-Jew statement. It is falsely attributed to Franklin, as far as we can tell. We know that Franklin was friendly with Jews. We know that he donated to build synagogues in Philadelphia. There doesn't seem to be any evidence to corroborate the authenticity of this speech. It is a hateful speech, so naturally bin Laden would be very excited to find a founding father of the United States of America might have said it, but no, it does not appear true that he said anything like this. Roman numeral 3, you permit drugs and intoxicants. Roman numeral 4, you permit acts of immorality and consider them to be pillars of personal freedom. He laughably specifically references President Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. That's fantastic. And what's funny is that we did the morality police thing. We did prohibition. It didn't work. In fact, it made things worse. And so once again, bin Laden is talking to an audience that he does not understand. He doesn't know our values. He doesn't know our history. Roman numeral 5, you permit gambling. Roman numeral 6, you exploit women. And I think that he's talking about you employ women and allow women to be equals in a workplace or in other aspects of life. And again, this is something that we pride ourselves in. This is a good thing as far as his audience, the American nation, is concerned. This is not going to go over well. I do wonder at this point how well the TikTok crowd who made this go viral actually read it, because it seems like maybe they just read the stuff about Palestine and didn't get any further than that. Because I don't think, the rest of this is so illiberal that it wouldn't fly even for the progressives. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that. You are a nation that practices the trade of sex in all of its forms. But it doesn't appear that bin Laden is actually talking about prostitution or things like that. He's talking about art, entertainment, tourism, and how we call it freedom, and other deceptive names you attribute to it. See, it's very interesting the way that he attributes freedom and the way that he sees us talk about freedom. And he'll continue doing that in this letter. And there is truth in what he's saying, just not the way that he's saying it. People must be disciplined. People must have tremendous self-discipline, otherwise we create problems and we commit trespasses against one another. But that doesn't mean that the solution is to coerce everyone to the same level and degree of discipline, because that does go against freedom. But at the same time, you cannot have freedom without tremendous self-control. And so as much as he is calling us to Islam in the name of self-control, I can appreciate and respect that. However, there are many other creeds and philosophies that help us attain self-control. And so as much as bin Laden wants to call us to Islam on these grounds, it doesn't work. In Roman numeral 8, he blames America for creating AIDS as a satanic American invention. Excellent. No, that's not quite how it happened, but thank you. This guy. Roman numeral 9, you have destroyed nature with your industrial waste. So here he's referring to pollution. He talks about us refusing to sign the Kyoto Protocol so that you can secure the profit of your greedy companies. Next he talks about political corruption and, predictably, blames it all on the Jews. Lovely. In Roman numeral 11, he talks about how we have destroyed mankind more than any other nation in history, and specifically references the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. I like this sentence here. How many acts of oppression, tyranny, and injustice have you carried out, O callers to freedom? That's some good irony. I mean, I disagree with the guy, but I can respect him when he deserves it. And his last Roman numeral under 2, let us not forget one of your major characteristics. Your duality in both manners and values, your hypocrisy in manners and principles. All manners, principles, and values have two scales, one for you and one for the others. Brilliantly said. I don't know where to start on that particular paragraph because A, it's true of everyone, and B, it's particularly true of Mr. bin Laden. So he's calling us to be better, while he himself is not a paragon of better. Under A, the freedom and democracy that you call to is for yourselves and for white race only. He justifies this statement by referencing the times that the United States of America's CIA has gone into other countries and dismantled duly elected governments when the governments were hostile to the USA. That's certainly an excellent point. It's something that many Americans, most Americans I think, are very critical of. His specific point is about the Algerian Islamic Party, which won an election and then got messed up by the United States of America's interference. And yes, that is a problem. However, it's plain that it's not a racial problem. But anyway, yeah, no, we can all agree that the United States of America should not be moving into foreign countries and telling them how to live and what to do with their own governments. Point 2b, your policy on prohibiting and forcibly removing weapons of mass destruction to ensure world peace, it only applies to those countries which you do not permit to possess such weapons. That's very true, and it's true for specific reasons. Now, the Iraq War had not begun yet. That happened the next March after this letter had been written. So I don't think bin Laden is referring to America's argument that they needed to purge Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. But he actually says later on, you do consent to Israel having such weapons, and that is true. However, he says Israel is allowed to keep and use such weapons to defend their security. I don't believe that Israel has used weapons of mass destruction. I believe that, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that their defense tactics have been limited to rockets and missiles. But it is remarkable the hate bin Laden has for Israel. It's not unexpected, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's remarkable. Anyone else you suspect, he says, might be manufacturing or keeping these kinds of weapons, you call them criminals and you take military action against them. In that particular region, I'm unaware of anyone trying to get nuclear weapons except for Iran, and bin Laden would not be bothered, I believe, by Iran being denied weapons of mass destruction, because Iran in the Middle East is, well, they're Shia while everybody else is Sunni, and so there's arguments there. C, you are the last ones to respect the resolutions and policies of international law, yet you claim to want to selectively punish anyone else who does the same. And then he launches, of course, into Israel, who for more than 50 years have been pushing UN resolutions and rules against the wall with full support of America. And again, this whole Israel-Palestine quagmire is a very difficult topic, and it's not one that I want to address here. But I don't believe that bin Laden is representing the facts accurately. He's representing the facts as an Arab would see it. And so it's useful for us to understand his perspective. It is not, however, an effective argument for calling on America to make changes to its international policy. In D, bin Laden calls out a apparent double standard where the United States of America is allowed to commit war crimes while not allowing others to do the same. Now, I've said this before, I do not disagree that America spends far too much of its time and resources warring in foreign lands, and I think that most of the people who I know from all different political perspectives would agree with that. And that throws into sharp contrast the issue here. He's calling Americans to dislike the war crimes. Well, Americans do dislike the war crimes. It is the elite. And this is why I often say I don't have a problem with Islam. I have a problem with coercion. I don't have a problem with most ideologies. I have a problem, again, with coercion. And what bin Laden is doing here is saying, you've done all of these horrible things, and you need to be coerced to do my kinds of horrible things, right? You should only agree with the bad things that I like. My personal standard ought to be the international standard. Obviously, this is a garbage argument from a garbage person, but this is an interesting read, and there's a lot here to take in. I don't think that if you're reading critically, or if you're understanding what you're reading, I don't think this letter is going viral. I don't think that it does it justice to say that this is, something that, what did some of those influencers say? I've only seen the videos a couple of times, and that's what prompted me to look into this, but there's little here that is as compelling as the people on social media seem to want you to believe. Bin Laden also mentions war crimes committed in Iraq in this paragraph, and since this is before Operation Iraqi Freedom, I can only assume that he's talking about Operation Desert Storm. But Desert Storm was a defensive measure to liberate Kuwait. Prior to that, it should have been a war, but it was a military operation. Prior to that exercise, Saddam Hussein claimed that it was a mutual merger of the two countries, but we know that after they were liberated, Kuwait was very grateful, and so, anyway, I'm certain there were issues that I don't know about. But again, see, my perspective in 2023 when I'm recording this is filled with things like Fallujah, filled with things like the horrible battles in Operation Iraqi Freedom that cause anything committed earlier than that by the United States of America to pale in contrast, indicating how utterly bin Laden's attempt to bring America down failed. Okay, E, and this is the last one for 2. You have claimed to be the vanguards of human rights, and your Ministry of Foreign Affairs issues annual reports containing statistics of those countries that violate any human rights. However, he writes, all these things vanished when the Mujahideen hit you. And Mujahideen means Muslims engaged in jihad, and so I believe that that's a reference to his attacks on 9/11. And then you implemented the same methods of the same documented governments that you used to curse. He claims that the USA took thousands of Muslims and Arabs into custody with no reasoned trial or disclosure. The number I can find is around 1,200, and so I don't think that is accurate. He also calls out Guantanamo. And so, yes, bin Laden, you're talking about things that we all agree on. What happened in Guantanamo was an embarrassment. Those are your words. I don't think that most Americans would disagree. Now, Republicans specifically, who attached their identity to supporting George Bush, would defend Guantanamo and may still now, but that is an extreme minority of Americans today, fortunately. This is not something that we look back with fondness, and we know very well that if people can be arrested and detained with no trial, we have a Bill of Rights for a specific reason, and if they can do it to you, they can do it to us, so we agree on that. Where we don't agree is that all of the things that you're criticizing, the problems in America's foreign policy that you're pointing out, these things are, or these criticisms are consistent with American values. They are not, however, consistent with bin Laden's values. So really, as he criticizes America for being a hypocritical nation, he is engaging in the exact same kind of hypocrisy. He wants us to live up to our values better. At least we have values of human rights to live up to. Okay, and that brings us to the end of response 2. So let's return to question 2. What are we calling you to do, and what do we want from you? Under 3, comment number 3 here, and the rest of these are fairly short. 1 and 2 are quite long. We call you to take an honest stance with yourselves, and I doubt you will do so, to discover you are a nation without principles or manners, and the values and principles to you are something which you merely demand from others, not that which you yourself must adhere to. And again, this is far more useful in understanding bin Laden's perspective and mindset than it is in actually understanding the United States of America. We do have values and principles, and we are quite strict about them. And when we violate them, it causes tremendous internal strife. And you know that is true because America has been extremely divided ever since the War on Terror began. So sure, I can disagree with this guy to the extreme, But it is true of anyone with whom we disagree that there's still something to be learned from them. And in this case, yeah, I think that his perspective does shed light on how America is perceived from the outside, and therefore how we could make meaningful changes at home. In number 4, bin Laden talks about how America needs to stop supporting Israel, needs to stop supporting the Indians in Kashmir, the Russians against the Chechens, and the Philippines against insurgents in Mindanao. So to beat the dead horse, I don't disagree that America needs to be out of a lot of these conflicts. However, what he's saying is Israel shouldn't exist. What he's saying is Indians who are primarily Hindu should give up land to Pakistan, which is primarily Muslim. I don't know much about the Russian-Chechen conflict, but again with the Philippines, the Manila government, he mentions, should give up territory or give up its ability to govern over the Muslims in the southern Philippines. So he's always on the side of other Muslims. So obviously, he's not standing on principle, you see. He's not saying conflict is bad. He's not saying standing for your principles is bad. He's simply saying opposing people with my same religion is bad. And that's immature. I don't know how else to describe what I'm reading here. Number 5, go home, or we will send you home as cargo in coffins. Great, okay. I think he's really losing what he was trying to do in the first place, which was answer that question, and now he's just kind of throwing threats out. 6, we call on you to end your support for the corrupt leaders in our countries. And then issues a threat, if you don't leave us alone, then we won't leave you alone. Number 7, everything really falls apart. We also call you to deal with us and interact with us on the basis of mutual interest and benefits. So he's actually not calling for America to stop being entangled in foreign alliances. He just wants that entanglement, that military prestige, and that money to be along his lines. So again, it's clear that he's not writing this letter from a place of principle. He's writing this letter from a place of bias. His next phrase is, if you fail to respond to all these conditions, then prepare for a fight with the Islamic nation. Obviously doesn't exist. But then he says, the nation of monotheism. And this really reveals the break in shared values and why this letter should not be received with a lot of enthusiasm from people in the West. This is a rehashing of the old claim that our traditions are legitimate and any other traditions are not. And why? Well, because he prefers it that way. And all militant Muslims in particular, there are other militant groups that have the same problem, but militant Muslims in particular have this same kind of bias where what I do, even if it's horrible, is perfectly legitimate and justified by the divine being, and anything you do, no matter how good or benevolent or wonderful, is the action of an infidel and you deserve to be murdered for it. This is extreme, and it certainly should not be received with enthusiasm. Obviously, Islam is not the only monotheist religion, and Islam itself is not united, as the Sunni-Shia conflict demonstrates to us all the time. And then he quotes the Quran. He talks about nation of honor, nation of martyrdom, nation of victory. Obviously, there is no Islamic nation, so nice try, Mr. bin Laden. But, the implication that he has here is that Allah supports us, therefore we are right. And what it breaks down to is the way that I see the world is really good because the way I see the world says so. There's nothing supporting him except, like he said at the very beginning of the letter, the law of Sharia, the law of Islam. He can't seem to argue on principle. He can't seem to argue using language that would unify people who exist outside his belief system, and that is an enormous weakness on the part of anyone who can't communicate with outsiders, and that's true in a political movement or a religious space or anything else. But in this particular situation, again, there are some really valid criticisms of how the United States has handled itself and handled its military in foreign countries. None of those things are present here in this letter. Bin Laden writes, the Islamic nation that was able to dismiss and destroy the previous empires like yourself. Again, that's not a very accurate reading of history, but there's his claim. The nation that rejects your attacks, wishes to remove your evils, and is prepared to fight you. You are well aware that the Islamic nation, from the very core of its soul, despises your haughtiness and arrogance. If the Americans refuse to listen to our advice and the goodness, guidance, and righteousness that we call them to, then be aware that you will lose this crusade Bush began, just like other previous crusades in which you were humiliated by the hands of the Mujahideen, fleeing to your home in great silence and disgrace. Not a very accurate representation of the Crusades either. If the Americans do not respond, then their fate will be that of the Soviets who fled from Afghanistan to deal with their military defeat, political breakup, ideological downfall, and economic bankruptcy. And so here he appears to be giving credit to Islam for the fall of the Soviet Union. I don't doubt that he believes his version of history, and certainly Afghanistan was a contributing factor, but it's not like they did it themselves, bringing down the Soviets, I mean. Okay, final line here. This is our message to the Americans. As an answer to theirs, do they now know why we fight them, and over which form of ignorance, by the permission of Allah, we shall be victorious? So let's look at this from an autopsy perspective. Now that I've read through 3,835 words, 9 full pages, what do I think of this letter penned by bin Laden? And what do I think of the apparent viral reaction people had to it? Primarily, I'm going to say this is a wonderful litany of illiberal ideas. Islam often faces the criticism that it is only the religion of peace so long as everyone agrees with them. And this letter exactly highlights that hellish idea. I will respect you and your right to live so long as you agree with me on everything. It is frankly embarrassing that bin Laden's legacy boils down to murdering a bunch of people and penning this asinine letter. And I don't throw that word out lightly. I believe that bin Laden is sincere as he writes this. However, if I, as an American, am his audience, none of this resonates with me. It appears to be full of contradictions. It is values that I find immature and backwards, and his vision for the future is laughable, frustrating, and frankly pathetic. No American wants to live in a world where everyone is the same. No American wants to say, yeah, I'm going to be self-disciplined because I fear you. That is not why we self-actualize. That is not what motivates or inspires us to be better people or better versions of ourselves. As bin Laden lists the problems in the world, especially the problems that the USA is involved in, what I notice is that he doesn't criticize the problems in the world where Muslims are harming other Muslims. He certainly doesn't talk about where people who aren't Muslim are harming people who aren't Muslim. The only conflicts that he seems to care about or mention here are where Muslims are on the losing side of any conflict. He reserves no criticism for his fellow Muslims, and in fact seems to justify even atrocities because of some verses from the Quran. Now, whether these verses are being implemented or applied correctly is not up to me. I'm noting that he's justifying things from the Quran, and so if you have a different interpretation of his verses and believe that these actually do point to peace, then that's interesting. But the way that he's interpreting them, these point to war. These point to wars of aggression, and in some cases, war of defense. And I think really the main takeaway from this whole exercise is that I understand bin Laden's point of view better than I did before. And that's very useful. Why is it useful? Because I value diversity, which Mr. bin Laden does not. Because I'm able to empathize with people whose values are distant from my own, and bin Laden is not. Because I stand on principles such as the idea that military conflict should not involve civilian populations, and I am willing to criticize my country when it violates those principles, but Mr. bin Laden is not. I believe that people who read the letter, or claimed to read the letter, and have come away saying, wow, this was really eye-opening, wow, he's right, wow, I really respect bin Laden and his points. I think they read through question 1, response 1A, where it talks about Palestine, and because of the bias that they have against Israel, they said, oh yeah, this is great. I do not believe that they continued to read the rest of the letter, because I do not believe that they could possibly have come away with any sense of this being a positive thing in the world. It clearly is not, unless these people who made the letter go viral have completely opposite values to myself, and as far as I know, other Americans. Okay, that's it. I've been through this letter in detail, and I hope that saved you some time. I don't know, it's a pretty long recording, so we'll see. But the point is, I know what the contents of bin Laden's infamous letter are, and now you do, and we can speak intelligently when anyone brings this up and says this is a good thing, and says that there are points in here that ought to be taken seriously. Well, even the good points utterly fail because bin Laden is not standing on principle, but is relying purely on his own bias to justify his demands. I hope this has been valuable, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you in the next video.